I'd love to hear your collective streams of consciousness about early access titles. I like the idea of games getting tweaked and polished before release so that more experimental ideas can get perfected. And there's been a few notable examples recently where early access has paid off well, e.g. Baldur's Gate 3. I guess Wicked is another one. But as a very stubborn consumer, I can't ever imagine playing to beta test something for a company. I do wonder if it's a sign the game is quote unquote too big if the studio can't do all of the testing in-house. Like on most subjects in life, I find myself mixed, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on early access, John?
I think it's really difficult to get it right. And it really comes down to making something that I think when you first release, you need to have something that's genuinely compelling and interesting. Even if, let's say you buy in day one and all you ever play is that early access bit should at least be enjoyable enough that you feel satisfied,
Right.
with your purchase. If it just feels like this, like kind of like, too much of a beta or like just like this very early kind of thing, it can be, because I think a lot of the people that do play these early access games may not actually check in again with them. I think there's probably a
Right.
high amount of people that do that.
There's got to
Right.
be yeah, you're absolutely right. There's got to be a good experience there that makes people look
Right.
forward to the update.
Exactly. So like something like, say, Wrath, Aeon of Ruin, if you remember that initial early access, I thought was quite good, and it made me want to play the game, and I played through it, and then I just set it aside and basically waited for the final thing to come out. And that I thought was a pretty good way to do it, because I understand the need to do this to sort of get additional funding on these smaller projects, especially. But I'm mostly talking single player games though. I think when you get into multiplayer, then another part that's really important is really getting the community involved. You know what I mean? Where you want it to feel like what the community should have access to the developers to some degree. Like I think having like a Discord server, for instance, can make a big difference. If you're actually in there interacting with users, I think that really sort of elevates the experience and it makes people want to get involved in your game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually brings people closer and makes them more tolerant of any sort of development issues, delays, and whatnot. The worst way to do it, I think, is just to put something out there that feels incomplete, be really cagey about updates, not interact with the community at all, and then just take forever to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a solid plan in place to constantly roll out new interesting content, keep people involved, it's probably not going to work out. So we've seen a mix of all of these from different developers. And yeah, like I would say No Rest for the Wicked was pretty interesting early this year because that was early access and they put out a sizable chunk of the game. But they were very open about what they wanted to do with it, where they really see the version 1.0 going. And it's also kind of like, it gets enough people talking about it and there's enough for the people that bought it, but it's also enough to kind of put it on the radar of people that maybe aren't into early access so that they would consider it when it does hit.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's pretty tricky though, I would say, based on what I've seen.
Alex?
I mean, John said everything that I think about this for the most part. I just say like, regardless of what John said, like I think also the way it's pitched on Steam really needs to be just detailed. It needs to explain everything and the expected level of polish as well for that experience. So that it all has to be laid out really well in a parsable way for the user to understand that it is an early access product.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing is, early access is it's a pretty strong label, right? It pretty much says that, this game isn't finished. So yeah, you can't really go in there with grand expectations of a fully polished game.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like the idea that it's also seen as a collaborative process. This concept of paying for a beta or whatever, I can see that, but it's not as if you don't know what you're getting if it's done right.